and welcome. My name's Mario Batali, and this is Molto Mario. I'm here with my good friends Tom, Sue, and Johnny, and we're talking a little bit today about Italian cooking, more specifically the cooking of Sicily. And even more specific than that, on the west coast, northwest coast of Sicily, there's a place called Palermo, which has one of the most magnificent markets in all of Italy called La Vucciria. The food is simple, it's delicious. Today we're going to make some eggplant. We're going to make a little pasta con le sarde and a little sweet and sour chicken that is very emblematic of some of the most national dishes of the entire area of Sicily, which, geographically speaking, is located just here off of the toe. Now, when you hear about the Straits of Messina, that is this area right here, and it's only about 30 miles across. One of the things to remember, though, however, Sicily is a lot closer to northern Africa than it is to Milan and Venice. So the food isn't going to have that similar flavor that you're used to. It's going to be something a little bit more exotic, a little bit different, and quite honestly, some of the most refreshing and delicious things are coming out of Sicily right now. The first dish we're making is called eggplant cotolette, or cutlets, and it's actually called the Milanese cutlets of the poor, because there's no meat. And in fact, when you talk about a largely agrarian society, of course that's what Italy is based on, you'll see that meat is often enough served in very special occasions and most often religious holidays, and that's to serve to kind of sanctify those days and make people remember them. Predominantly, however, though, we're eating either things that we caught by the market, from the fish market, or from the vegetable market that we bring in or that we grow ourselves. The dish is very simple. The main event is to get some eggplants. These are your regular standard eggplants. You'll see that there's always a lot of different kinds of eggplants in the markets right now. And what we're going to do is cut them into relatively thick pieces. And you can see right here, you can see the seed pockets that are sometimes considered bitter. And the way to remove that bitterness is to season them aggressively with salt. What that'll do is it'll cause the liquid to exude. If you're familiar with the action of salt, what salt does is forces the cells to give up whatever liquid they have, and in this case, it's going to be the water that's naturally present there. And you salt them relatively aggressively, because what's going to happen is when that salt is actually exiting, it rinses it almost completely away, and you're not left with it. What we want to do then is, yes?
A question for you. There are lots of different types of eggplants. Can you use any kind of eggplant?
Absolutely. In this dish, however, you'd want one that was a little bit thicker as opposed to some of those small ones. You've seen those small Japanese and Chinese eggplants. They aren't going to give you this kind of cutlet feeling, which is what we're looking for. This is actually kind of a dish that's, right, this is like a steak of eggplant.
Right.
Now, what we've done is these have been sitting there for a while. They've sat under the salt, and you can see they're kind of dripping out that liquid. I find, however, that they're not as bitter. The reason that they originally started to do this because of the bitterness of those seed pockets. For some reason, whenever I go to the grocery store, when I buy eggplants, I don't find that they're that bitter. So I rarely salt them unless I want this particular texture, which is to say it's a little bit more leathery. When you salt them like this, there's more chew to it as opposed to that kind of creamy eggplant parmesan feeling that sometimes you'll get.
And then you wash off the salt.
I'm not going to wash off the salt because it's kind of exuded enough liquid to get away. Okay. If you'd only salted them for, say, 20 minutes or a half hour, a lot of the salt action might not have taken place, and you wouldn't notice this kind of wet sheen to them, and then you might want to rinse them. But these have actually kind of rinsed themselves. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of parsley and mix that in with the egg. I'm not seasoning the egg at all, and I'm not seasoning anything else in this dish. I have fresh breadcrumbs, and basically we're just going to go like so, dredge them in the egg, and then into the breadcrumbs. Now, and then you just pat them down.
Fresh breadcrumbs there, you've made it yourself? Or
yes, what we do to make fresh breadcrumbs is you just take fresh bread, chop it into cubes, and then throw it in the food processor. If you wanted them white, that is to say without any of the brown flecks, because you're looking to make something really fancy looking, you would cut off the crust and just use the miga, or the crumb, or the inside part of the bread. Right. But I like this. Now, if you wanted to toast them, then you get a much different and much more intensely developed flavor, as toasting does with anything, and you'll get a lot more of that complex kind of bread, oven, baked wheat kind of thing going on. But we like it just simple for here. So this is just kind of raw breadcrumbs. Now, the main event is how you're going to cook these. You don't want to grill these, and you don't want to bake them, because we spent time getting this nice little crust on the outside with our bread and egg. So what we're going to do is saute them. And the main event here, the most important thing, is to make sure that you don't cook them too quickly. Because you want to cook them all the way through, you're going to put enough oil in there to come up to about a quarter of the way. So this is almost like a pan fry, not really a saute. And they're going to soak up a little bit of that oil, but that's not really anything that we're too worried about. Then what you want to do is make sure that you don't cook them too fast, because it's easy to get very dark on the outside without cooking it through to create that unctuous, delicious inner part. So we're putting them in probably a medium-low pan, and we're going to cook them for 3 to 4 minutes. Yes?
But what about the breadcrumbs you just buy on the store? Wouldn't work for this? What
The breadcrumbs that you buy in the blue or green can are on the same level as the cheese that you buy in the blue or green can. That is to say, it's not bad if you need it, but if you have bread and you have a food processor, or even if you can just tear this stuff up, it's easy enough to make it in the real world that you don't have to.
Okay.
But, you know, if it came down to a pinch and that's all you had, by all means, I would recommend using it. Now, we're going to cook these on a medium-low heat. They're going to take a couple of minutes, and then we're just going to finish them very simply. The next thing we're going to do is make pasta con le sarde. Probably the dish most thought of when you talk about classic Sicilian cooking.
Yeah, my mother's favorite.
Absolutely, and one of your not-so-favorites, but one that you're going to learn to love right here. Now, what we'll do is we're going to take some fennel, and we're going to just cut it into what are called in French bâton, and in Italian, just pezzi. We're going to take long pieces like that and cut it relatively thin. We want it to be able to cook and caramelize. Again, the caramelization is the natural process of the sugar coming out of whatever it is to the forefront because of the heat. And what that does is it develops an incredible depth of flavor. If you just poach these, you would have kind of a monotonous or monochrome flavor to it. When you add the caramelization to it, suddenly you start to get a lot more components of the palate. So we're going to take a hot pan, extra virgin olive oil. We're going to toss those in there like so. And the main event, the real way to get something to caramelize is put it in its pan and then don't worry about moving it. Let it sit there for a few minutes so that it actually really develops that caramelize. The tendency for home cooks is often to put something in the pan and then, you know, because they see Bobby Flay or Remo Lagasse doing this on TV, and it looks really sexy to be throwing things around like that. But it's really important to, if you want this to caramelize, get that really deep, dark crust, you just have to let it sit there without anything on it. We're not adding any salt or anything to it. When we come back, I'll show you how we're going to finish up these beautiful cotolette, and we'll get on and get funky with the pasta with sardines.
All right.
Hey, welcome back. Well, now, as you can see, with slow, proper cooking, we get these succulent little melanzane or eggplant out. And the main thing here is to treat it simply. Now, as you can see, my fennel is caramelized quite nicely here. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But now, you can move it around a little bit, and at this point, I'm going to season it. What that's going to do is cause it to immediately start to soften just a little bit, because that's what we want it to do.
And you can always get fennel
You can get fennel year-round all you want.
No
One of the main
substitute.
events to remember, though, however, is that fennel comes in two varieties. There's this one here, and there's this one here. And this is a great lesson. This one is the masculine of the two, and this one is the feminine. If you see this one, it's not nearly as tasty as the feminine. So you're always going to try to buy the more round one than the kind of rigid one and upright like that.
Sometimes after a meal, I've seen people having fennel after a meal
Absolutely.
to like, aid the digestion or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. They'll dip it in a little oil or just a little bit of salt and serve it as kind of like the pinzimonio is what they call it. It's absolutely delicious. Makes a heck of a lot of sense. Makes people feel a lot kind of light and fresh.
Yeah.
It's the way that a lot of the French and Italians like to eat their salad after they've eaten their main course. Just kind of gives you a little roughage, as it were. So now I'm going to take just a little squeeze of a fresh lemon, orange, a little bit of pepperoncino, or hot pepper flakes.
The male.
Yes.
The male fennel fronds. That's all he's really good for, is giving up the fronds. And then, bon appetito.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead and serve yourself. I've got my fennel now going quite well, deep, dark, and rich. I'm going to take some fresh sardines. In this case, you could very easily use canned sardines for no lack whatsoever of quality. They're very delicious. I love canned sardines, and they make this dish quite nicely. We've removed the spines from these. We're going to cut them into 4 or 5 pieces like so. Get the tail out of there.
It's so soft.
Yeah.
And just toss them in. Now, the main event here, the whole idea here, not the main event.
Wow.
How is that, by the way?
Fantastic.
Is that tasty? So we've got, now the whole lineup here is the ingredients. And this is what we call mise en place in the French kitchens. It literally means in the Italian world, just having all of your stuff together. Because the sauce is very easy to make once you've set up those few minutes of bringing all of those things together.
Wow.
So now I'm going to saute with that deeply caramelized fennel the sardines. I'm going to add just a little more salt to go with them. And then we're just going to add the ingredients. that go with it. I'm going to take an onion, and in this case, I'm going to slice it cut it up very, very finely because I've already spent all that time caramelizing my fennel.
Male onion or female onion?
This is one of the Andy Warhols of onions. That is to say, we're not really sure. In onions, it's really hard for me to tell, and I'm not even sure that they actually have gender, as it were. We're going to throw those onions in like so, and we want to immediately get them in there and tossed around with the rest of the stuff. What they're going to do is we're going to want to wilt those, but we're not going to want to caramelize those because we really want the fennel and the sardine to be the game, but we like that kind of pizzico, that little Italian touch of lightness that's going to bring. We're going to let those go for a minute, and we're going to talk just for a little bit about azafran or zafferano. This is clearly something that was brought from the south or from the Spanish reign. The Spaniards had Sicily after the Moors were kind of booted because the Spaniards kind of came back and took everything over and kicked them out. And they brought in a lot of saffron that they'd also gotten themselves from Spain, but as well as in Morocco, there's a lot of use of saffron. So saffron, although not necessarily indigenous here in Sicily, is something that they love to use, and it has that kind of exotic, again, this is what smells like La Vucciria Market. It's just got this exotic souk kind of thing going on. Now, to even add that up a little bit more, we're going to take some currants that have been soaked.
So, Mario, those are now dried currants?
Those were dried currants. Now they're called reconstituted currants because I've soaked them in either warm water or a little bit of wine.
Okay.
Currants are little berries. They're called rebase in Italian, and they look like little tiny huckleberries.
Oh.
They look kind of like a small grape if you were going to try to compare.
Raisins, or are they very different than?
No, you could easily use raisins or golden raisins or anything. The sun-kissed, heard it through the grapevine guys. The whole darn thing would work. Now we're going to take our pine nuts. They're in there. We're going to take the tomatoes and just toss the whole thing through. Now, you've heard me talk a lot about the relative tightness or the viscosity of the pasta sauce. One of the main events here is in this dish, you want it relatively tight. You do not want it to be loose and soupy. It's going to be more like a salad dressing on the noodles than this big wet ragu of something. So, although it looks a little tight right now, I think when we see that those tomatoes have kind of started to come out a little bit with the liquid because I just added salt, it's going to make just enough kind of wetness. One of the main events in all Italian cooking is the idea of balance. And there's probably nowhere that it's more evident than in understanding proper pasta cookery. That is to say, we cook the noodles, we take them out, we put them in the pan with whatever the condiment or the sauce is going to be, and we cook it together so that the two separate units come together as one. And that's exactly what you want in this dish.
The merge of flavor.
The merge of everything together, but most importantly, the texture. It's something that we always talk about a lot in the restaurants, and it's called mouthfeel. It's the way something feels when you put it in your mouth. And in my opinion, properly cooked pasta has such a brilliant mouthfeel that even with cream of mushroom soup, a perfectly cooked linguine is a really good thing. And if you can understand that, then you start to really understand why food's texture is as important as its flavor when you start to really cook around the house and get things together. Now, that's going to be very evident in this beautiful, soft, braised kind of chicken. This is called pollo in agrodolce, or sweet and sour chicken. And again, we're talking a lot about the Moorish or Northern African influences on food. And the sweet and sour is made really evident in this dish. The Arabs brought cane sugar to Sicily when the Moors kind of took over the world in the 800, 900 range. And they've always fallen in love with it. They've been with it. And now the Sicilian sweet tooth is legendary. It's renowned, as is their making of great desserts and their use of sweet and sour in many dishes. To get a chicken, obviously, you can have your butcher cook this up. You can buy chicken pieces. Often enough, when I'm making something like a braised chicken, I'll actually only use legs and thighs because I think they're better than just about anything else. But the whole chicken is the traditional in this recipe. And what we're going to do is just take that backbone off like that. And a good, sharp, heavy knife will help you do this. I always like to cut the breast into 4 pieces. Now, the whole thing here, though, however, is understanding that you really want to brown this well. That's the whole thing in trying to decipher and understand why good home cooking can be made even better. It's putting it in a nice hot pan and allowing a nice amount of crust to develop in this first phase of braising. I'm going to get a nice heavy bottom pan. I'm going to take my chicken pieces.
Salting it, why?
Salting it because that's the seasoning. That's the main event here. You want to get it seasoned because that's going to, if you season as you go along, you find that you don't have to adjust things at the end. Anyway, we got our chicken going. I'm going to drop my bucatini in. When we come back, I'll show you how we taste our pasta con le sarde, and we'll finish up on this chicken. So please, stay with us. Hey, welcome back. We've got our perfectly cooked bucatini here, which is the traditional pasta. Maybe they'll call it perciatelli. The traditional pasta for making this beautiful pasta con le sarde. And like always, we put it in the pan to bring it together and gently stir it around. Now, this is relatively tight, is the word that we use in the restaurant business. If it was too tight, what you would do is take a little bit of this pasta water and either take it with a ladle and splash it out like so. That's why you need one of these pasta pots. So when you strain out your pasta water, you don't throw this valuable ingredient down in the drain, as it were.
Wow.
Then what we want to do is just toss this a little bit like so. And then I'm going to take it to the plate. Now, of course, we're here talking about brilliant Sicilian cooking. The first dish we had were those eggplant. The second dish is this. And quite frankly, if there was one thing that you were going to talk about if you talked about Sicilian cooking, it would be this pasta con le sarde. Sprinkle a little bit more of those masculine fronds of fennel. And then serve it up. Sue, why don't you go ahead? Oh, yeah, there you go, right there.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
perfect. Now, while you guys are continuing to enjoy your next course, I will get on with the chicken. Now, I've spent some time here browning it nicely. You almost can't over-brown the chicken at this point. You want to get it nice and deep and rich, because that's going to add all that flavor. And then you want to get it out of the pan, because now we're going to create the braising liquid. That is to say, this fragrant...
Voila.
How's it looking over there, guys?
Oh, fantastic.
Now, in the braise, we're going to take an onion. We're going to take some celery. And in this case, we're not going to cut it up as finely as we did for the pasta, because we want this to be able to retain a certain amount of textural integrity. If we cut this up really, really fine and we braised it for 40 minutes with this chicken, it would become almost like a paste. We don't want it to become a paste. We want it to have its own individual texture, so we're cutting it about that big. Go ahead, manja, manja. Now, we've got our pan. We haven't done anything with it. We haven't cleaned out those little scrapey brown bits that are at the bottom of it, because we really want those.
Rockin'.
Yeah.
Is it rocking?
Mario, I love the way
Just kind
you
of
cut
gently
your
comes in.
onion.
Right, exactly.
Flavor just kind of gently starts to roll in on you.
And it's not really fishy.
No.
It's not really out of touch. The fennel comes at you and does a really good thing.
Yeah.
And it should be just a delicate balance. Again, as I said before, it's all about the balance in Italian cooking. If you can get that down, the tendency for Americans is because we're so rich, abbondanza. You put too much of everything and everything, and all of a sudden, it just tastes like it's out of focus. You take a picture, and it's like, well, I can't quite taste that edge.
That's right.
The main event in really good cooking is understanding those edges. So now I've got my celery, I've got my onions. I'm going to add some beautiful Sicilian olives.
Yeah.
Some people like to take the pits out because they're worried their friends will eat one of these and not recognize it for what it is.
Right.
In Italy, they know that the olive has a pit in it, so they generally leave them in all the time. Hey, what's this? Well, it's a pit, sir. It comes in the olive naturally. Now, we're going back and we're talking a little bit about this whole kind of Moorish influence. Again, capers and currants and sugar are going to create the base for this braise. And that's kind of the sweet and salty and tangy. And the sugar's actually going to be sweet and sour, made by the addition of vinegar. And vinegar is going to be the main event here. We're not the main braise, not the main event. So I'm going to take about almost a half a cup of vinegar. And red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar is good. You wouldn't want to use a balsamic vinegar. You're trying to maintain the integrity of the dish. And to do that, you often enough just use the ingredients that are traditional to the region. So balsamic vinegar comes from Modena, you use that. Red wine vinegar is all over the rest of Italy, you use that. We're going to take some toasted almonds, and we're going to toss our chicken pieces back in there. Now, in a braise, we're not boiling it. It's not got too much stuff in there. It's just enough to kind of come up to the shoulders of those pieces. It doesn't take very long. It'll take about 15 or 20 minutes. You want to make sure that you get all the juices. Then we cover the thing back up, bring it up to a boil, lower the heat to a simmer, and we'll just cook it for 20, 25 minutes. When we come back, I'll show you how to bring this beautiful pollo in agrodolce together. So please stay with us. Hey, welcome back. Now, we've just braised this. It's just about fallen off the bone, which is exactly where we want it to be, and yet tender and succulent because we've spent our time caramelizing the outer crust of that skin by cooking it as long as we did. And we're just going to pile it up. And this is one of the things that I really like people to understand. When you're cooking at home, it shouldn't necessarily look like a restaurant plate. It should look like there's a nice pile of food there that didn't get a bunch of graduates from fancy cooking schools to get their hands all over it. They just kind of fell naturally from the wings of poetry down onto the plate. We're going to take a little bit more of the almonds, some fennel fronds to pile it up. We're going to squeeze just a little bit of orange juice over the top and then drizzle a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. Then we're going to take a couple of these little chili peppers here because we love this hot and sweet and salty, all kind of combining like that. We're going to break them up just like that so they don't look so consistent. Sprinkle it all over the top like that. And then, as if to make a little warning sign, we'll put a couple of chilies like that. Beware, chilies below. And there you have it, in the classic style of Sicilian cooking, pollo in agrodolce. Buon appetito. I want to thank you guys for being here because you've certainly made it a lot of fun to be Sicilian, as well as you are Sicilian. And I'd like to see you guys as soon as possible on the next Molto Mario.